Hello, everybody. I'm Austin.
And I'm Dan,
And normally I'd say we're here to play games.
but we're here to review games this time.
That's right. Today is our first retrospective. We wanted to go over Skies of Arcadia because it was our first game on the channel, and we wanted it to be like our entry into the retrospective series as well. We had seen some interest about it. I know it's been like over a year now since we played it, but thank you for your patience. We are here to take a look at it, right? Because the reality is that Skies of Arcadia came out during this, I don't want to say golden era of turn-based RPGs, but it is a really like a time when it was super popular, right? You had things like Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest that were dominating the series, the genre, and Skies of Arcadia was almost like this hidden gem that showed up, right? Originally it released on the Dreamcast and then later on the GameCube, which we'll go into that in just a minute. So we just wanted to take a moment to kind of like dive into it and see what makes Skies of Arcadia such a unique entry into the genre of role-playing, turn-based role-playing games, but also as its own entity. So
Yeah, like a lot of people, I know I had kind of started playing this around the time when Final Fantasy was big on the PlayStation 1. Played it on the Dreamcast, it remained kind of an enduringly unique entry into the genre, in our opinion. We just kind of wanted to do a deep dive, go through all the information. We did talk about some of it in our gameplay, but this is a full retrospective on it, so, we hope you enjoy.
Right. So we'll start off strong with the development history, which for some of you, you'll be like, oh, I don't care about development history, which is why I make chapters on these videos. But for the rest of us who like to see how things get where they're at, this is for you, right? So originally, Skies of Arcadia or Arcadia Legends, Eternal Arcadia is the name it came up to. It began in 1999 under the code name Project Ares, but then was later changed to Eternal Arcadia in 2000. It was developed by an internal Sega team known as Overworks, which consisted of staff from Team Andromeda, so people who worked on, like, say, Panzer Dragoon Saga, and the Phantasy Star development teams. So if you're a Phantasy Star Online fan, this is the place for you. Producer was Rieko Kodama, who worked on Phantasy Star 1, 2, and 4, and worked on the first two Sonic the Hedgehog games for the Genesis of all things, which are some of my favorite Sonic games. The scenario writer was Shuntaro Tanaka, who was known for writing stories for the first two Sakura War RPGs, as well as working on Valkyria Chronicles. And then our composers were Yutaka Minobe and Tatsuyuki Maeda. Maeda was known for composing music for Sonic 3 and Knuckles, so definitely a robust team was working on this. And the team was made up of roughly 20 people, which is kind of small when you think about it, especially for how big this game is and everything else that goes into making games, right? Because they wanted to make a seamless entry into buildings without loading, and they wanted to use an expressive kind of anime art style to have more dynamic facial expressions and emotions, which, if anybody's familiar with the era of the genre of those games, right, when they came out in the 2000s, that was something that kind of was lacking in the contemporary RPGs, right? You look at Final Fantasy VII, Final Fantasy VIII, as Dan pointed out as we were kind of going over this, the meme of Squall, where he's just like, you're the best looking guy here, and it's just pixels, right?
Some of the hardware limitations of the time, but I really think even on the Dreamcast release, they did a very good job at, making the characters really colorful and expressive.
Right.
It's just clearly an emphasis where Final Fantasy kind of came, there is 3D here, guys, check it out, kind of thing. And
right.
Just a different focus.
For sure, yeah. Like another thing that they expressly wanted to do, right, was to make this game a more bright and cheerful expression with a focus on exploring a large game world, especially because its contemporaries, Final Fantasy VII and 8 especially, were those darker themes, grittier expressions, which are fine, great stories. They just wanted something different, right? Initially, the game was being developed for the Sega Saturn and had battles that focused on land and the tops of trains, interestingly enough. But it wasn't until they moved to the Dreamcast that the idea of traveling the skies was set. And that came about because they were inspired by the Age of Discovery, or the Age of Exploration, of our own world's history, right? Which is part of the early modern period from approximately the 15th to the 17th centuries. There are several well-known seafarers from a number of European countries explored, colonized, and conquered regions across the globes, right? People like Christopher Columbus, Ferdinand Magellan, who first circumvented the globe between 1519 and 1522, which is super cool. Vasco da Gama, and more. The team took care to make sure that Ica and Fina were always on equal footing with Vice rather than constantly being saved by him, which is, I think, something that kind of gets lost in narratives a lot. And I think here, for the most part, they succeeded on this, right? Ica and Fina are very independent people. They don't require Vice to save them. And you don't really get this feeling of the protagonist, or the male protagonist specifically, needing to save the females, except for like a couple of places, right? Because you have Vigoro and the Ica encounter when they're in the Grand Fortress. And there's also Vice comforting Ica and Fina in kind of a heroic manner. And I think here it might have been more interesting if they were trying to maintain this equal footing, if maybe Ica and Fina had ended up having that conversation to strengthen their friendship and to build each other up, rather than Vice being like, I got you, boo, And I don't hate that conversation. I don't think there's anything wrong with it, but if you're trying to like expand it,
I think for the time, they certainly were kind of working on that camaraderie among equals. Within the party, there was much less of the damsel in distress style of things, which, turn-based RPGs, JRPGs have been going that direction for a while, and they had been at the time. But it was interesting that was a focus of the team. I really think it's a good focus, for sometimes somebody gets in a jam and they need help, kind of thing. But it certainly could have been much more. I don't know. From modern sensibilities, there's always this sense of like, oh, they could have done this, but at least for the time, as a product of its time, I really think they did a great job with this focus.
Yeah, and I think, like I said, the strength of their independence is really shown when the party gets separated, right? Because Ica and Fina are kind of by themselves, and they have to progress their own goals. Like, they want to find Vice, but they don't just sit there and do nothing and wait for him to show up. They do their own thing. And they trust him to do his own thing, and at some point they'll meet. And the context of their age kind of helps too, right? Because they're all like 17 or 18. They're kids. So there's a lot of like overlapping things that are happening. But, overall, I think they did really well, even if there were some tropes that kind of got leaned into, and that's fine.
Mentioning their ages, it is very interesting to contrast them with other 17 and 18-year-old late teen casts of the time, such as Final Fantasy VIII, where the characters are very, very different than kind of these more colorful, they're almost childish at times characters. They've got this sense of like youth and whimsy to them that, for example, Final Fantasy VII or VIII's cast, I believe VII's cast is a little older, but VIII's cast, really, they don't have a lot of that. They've grown up, they're adults,
Right. We don't have Squall and Quistis having that, dialogue where she's predicting what he says because he's just so broody. But in regards to like the historical architecture and ancient civilization, most of these are attributed to one team, right? So you have Fatoma, Ixtaka, the Valuan place, like all of their different lands, Nazarad. All of that architecture and ancient civilizations and all of these are actually attributed to one team member, who is Shuntaro Tanaka. And the reason being is because Shuntaro majored in history at the university he studied at, and conceptualized the world and scenario, right? So major components that inspired the discovery aspect of the game. And then eventually the game was released in Japan in October of 2000 on the Dreamcast, again as Eternal Arcadia, was released in North America in November of 2000, and then released in Europe with English, German, French, and even Spanish in April of 2001. So that's kind of like how it came to be. That being said, the game was renamed from Eternal Arcadia to Skies of Arcadia for its Western audience. They thought it would be more appealing and express the premise of the story a little bit better, which honestly, given how I know people in the US can be, Skies of Arcadia would be a more appealing title, so I think that was a smart move.
Eternal Arcadia is fire, though.
It is.
For sure.
It is a great name, but to make it more approachable to the masses, I suppose. And it was actually localized primarily by two people. Like, they had a small team, but it was primarily two men, Chris Lucic, I think is how you pronounce his name, and Clayton Vorlick. The two men were given complete freedom to change the game content in whatever way they saw fit, with the understanding that Sega held the right to veto any of their changes. Because of this, much of the dialogue that we actually experience in the game was changed or entirely rewritten. They did a rough translation of the entire game from Japanese to English as a first draft, and then deleted the Japanese original version from the records and worked from the final draft exclusively from the initial translation and subsequent rewrites. So, like, Vorlick completely rewrote the dialogue for Enrique, Vigoro, and Fina. Lucic rewrote Gilder and Aika, and both of them co-wrote Vice. Certain speech patterns that were expected to be annoying were removed, and this is something that we kind of see in like Xenogears as well, where we talked about how the localization was there that represented a common Japanese like repetitive vocal tick, right? Think of things like saying san at the end of something, like minasan or everyone, for example. So Fina had this kind of like quirk where she would say things like, you know, she would have her sentence and then add everyone or minasan at the end of it.
Minasan.
Yeah, right.
Kind of like Datebayo Naruto.
Right, yeah, exactly. It's just like that vocal tick. So for their Western audiences, they nixed it. But they kept like the more interesting patterns, quirks, and jokes that were kind of given to many of the rest of the characters. Apparently, in fact, many of the dry, sarcastic responses were added to the dialogue in exchange for a more straightforward interaction from the original script. This addition was because of the influences like the work of Joss Whedon had on the men, which I find fascinating. To know that Joss Whedon influenced these guys as they were interpreting and localizing.
Fortunately, it did not get too quippy, but there's a definite humor and whimsical nature to the dialogue itself, which is, it gives it its charm, I think. So yeah, I really think they struck a good balance with this game.
Yeah, I think so too. And even more fun is that many of the side characters and even weapons were renamed after members of the localization and QA team, which is something I didn't know until I started digging into this. So a prime example is the Vorlick blade. Dayton Vorlick is one of the localizers. There's one of the gunners, one gunner in particular that Dan and I kept joking about was Timus, the gunner, right? We kept saying, who made that man a gunner? Apparently Timus was a friend of Vorlick's who got him his first industry job in the world. And just little things like that. There were like Lucic Slimes, there was Mabel the Raider, who was an assistant lead to Mabel Chung. So like, it was cool. Then of course there's some of the more mature content was edited and scaled back, right? So a real great example rather would be like the references to Aika with her implied assault by Vigoro when they were captured, right? That was toned way back. References to Ramirez obsessively talking about Gaussian in later scenes of the game were reconstructed. Cigarettes were removed completely. Shops that served loqua juice instead of alcohol, like made from the loqua berry. Belena's
not fermented at all. It's just juice, right?
Right, exactly. Belena's outfit was altered to be a little less revealing. If I remember correctly, though, that was such a minor change that you wouldn't know, honestly.
Yeah, incredibly minor.
Yeah. But in total, the localization was completed in roughly 4 months, with the team working 80 to 100 hours, 100-hour work weeks, rather. So that's a lot of work in a very small amount of time.
Clearly a product of a passion project, if you will. You can tell there's a lot of feeling and a lot of passion put into building, and even just something like localizing and translating this game.
Right. And this kind of brings us to the porting the game into what we now know as Skies of Arcadia Legends, which is the game that we played, the Dreamcast version. So in October 2001, shortly after Sega announced that it was abandoning the Dreamcast to exclusively make software for other consoles, they announced a port for Skies of Arcadia with plans to release to both the Nintendo GameCube and the Sony PlayStation 2. By August of 2002, the PS2 version of the port had been abandoned in favor of the GameCube exclusively, which was about 80% complete. And then Skies of Arcadia Legends was released in Japan in December of 2002. North America got it in January of 2003, and then Europe in May of 2003. In 2004, they did announce a port for Windows, but it was never released.
Such a shame.
Yeah, for real. I would play on the Windows for sure. In many ways, Sega and Kodama, the producer, view Legends as a bit of a director's cut, right? Because there were several improved features. There was slightly more detailed character models, more stable frame rates, reduced loading times, new side quests and subplots, new hidden discoveries, and a wanted list of new enemies. Other changes that they made were they also reduced the random battle encounter rate.
Badly needed.
Yeah, for sure. And they gave a bit of an experience boost to kind of compensate for that. Pupil notifications moved to the TV rather than the VMU, which, for those who aren't familiar, the Dreamcast had this little insert in the controller. It was a little screen. It was known as a VMU. So any kind of pupil notification was shown there instead of on the TV. So they made that more accessible.
Doubled as a memory card as well.
Yes,
the VMU did.
That's true. They removed a side quest from the game, or a mini game rather, from the game. It's called Pentas Quest. So I think we talked about this in the game too, where there were these statues that we got a hold of. And those statues were part of that game, but we never needed to give them to Penta. He never requested them. They just were there in the list of items.
Yeah, he had a whole thing about wanting to find these statues, and it kind of just doesn't lead anywhere in Legends because the minigame has been removed.
Right. And there was some DLC information from the Dreamcast release that got implemented into the main game. So the giant looper, the Hamachow Island, and in fact the tuna cutlass and the swirl meringue were all part of that DLC. So that's also interesting to me, at least. I didn't realize there was DLC for the game.
Yeah, quite a lot of cool stuff that I don't know, pretty much I never completed the Dreamcast version of the game, and so it's sort of, oh, this is just part of the game, but it really wasn't. It was DLC for the Dreamcast version. So
right. And that kind of covers all of the development stuff, and I know that was kind of laser pointed in, but bullet points are nice sometimes. But if you made it this far and you haven't watched our entire series of the game, which you should, we can give you some overlapping, broad strokes review of what's happening in the game to kind of give you some context of what else we're going to be talking about. So, at the beginning of the game, we got Fina, who's this young Sylvite. She's fleeing through the night skies in her silver airship, pursued by Admiral Alfonso, who's a big meanie head, under orders to capture her. Alfonso disables her ship, but just as he captures Fina, the Blue Rogues, our main protagonists Vice and Aika, raid his vessel along with some other people, and they rescue Fina and defeat Alfonso's war beast and return to the secret base, their pirate island.
And Alfonso's assistant falls off the ship with the best scream ever as he falls into the skies of Arcadia. Exactly.
Yes. But the next day, Vice and Ica recover a moonstone from the Shrine Island that they see it crashing into the Shrine Island. They go recover it, and they return to find that Pirate Island has been destroyed by the Valuan Armada, with Fina and their crew captured. So they set out on a daring rescue mission to Valuad, joining forces with rough fisherman Drachma, who is seeking out his vengeance upon the Arc Whale Rachnum. And he hears about like the harpoon, which he's like, oh, that'll be good for defeating the Arc Whale. So they go to the Valua City to free their friends and escape the Grand Fortress, which was an unprecedented accomplishment, because before then, no one had ever escaped the Grand Fortress. After that, Fina reveals her mission, right? She was actually sent to the surface, if you could call that the surface, to collect the 6 moon crystals before Valua can use them to awaken the Gigas, which are these powerful, ancient weapons. And there's one associated with each of the moons in the world, which there are several colors, right? We've got red and blue and green, yellow, white. There's a black one floating around somewhere. So Vice and Ica decide to join her on the quest.
Purple. There's a purple one.
Thank you. Yeah, I knew I was forgetting one. Purple. But Vice and Ica join her, and the first place they're going to is to get the red crystal, which is located in the land of Nasser, which is under the red moon. And there, excuse me, there in Nasser, Drachma abandons them, and it'll be like the first of several times.
He flies off. He has to find Rachnum.
Right. He's got things to do. And so they encounter a belly dancer, I guess, named Belena. And she offers them a ride to the temple. Pyrin? Something like that.
Pyrin, I believe.
Yeah. Where they retrieve the red crystal. Belena's like, actually, I'm a Valuan Admiral, and she's Beleza, and she steals the crystal, summons the red Gigas, and forces Ica and the gang, Vice, Ica, and Fina, to kind of fight off the Gigas. Thankfully, Drachma shows back up because he felt bad for abandoning them. So he summons his courage, goes back for them. They fight off the red Gigas Recumen.
And they have to deal with Beleza's ship in order to do so, because the Gigas is too much for the Little Jack, which is Drachma's ship.
Right, yeah. The Recumen is immortal at that point in the game, so their counterattack is then to take on Beleza's ship and knock her out, which they do. She calls off the Gigas. It goes back into the sandy dunes. And they get, I think, a new engine from her, some new weapons.
They take her engine. Mm-hmm.
Yep. They take, I think, her magic cannons too, so they can cast spells from the ship at that point.
Right.
They learn about the green crystal being in the Ixtacton region, which is under the green crystal, the green moon. There, they encounter Admiral DeLoco, right? Crazy guy. He was my favorite one to voice, for obvious reasons if you watched it, but he's causing problems, right? And so the party shows up. They end up in Horteca. They're looking for this king who should know where the green crystal is. He's like, oh, it's over here at the gates of Rixus. And they're like, okay, we'll go look over there, except for it's not there. And then DeLoco shows up, and they have to deal with DeLoco, and DeLoco runs off, and they go over to the Moonstone Mountain. There's lots happening here, where the High Priest is being held captive, and the Hortecan King's like, actually, the priest knows where it's supposed to be. You should go talk to him. You know, like, okay, I guess we'll go do that. So they go to Moonstone Mountain, rescue the priest, deal with Alfonso again, who leaves just as unceremoniously as he did before. And while they're doing that, the Hortecan king is summoning the Green Gigas. So now the Little Jack has to contend with Grendel, the green gigas. But they handle that, right? So they take care of DeLoco. They knock Grendel into like this. When you're flying around in the ship, it seems like a tiny space.
You have to knock Grendel. I was trying to remember Grendel. You have to knock it into basically a valley of sorts.
Yeah, it's like a ravine that has like a river running through it. But when you're flying around it, it looks like it's this tiny little stream. Like there's like no way him falling is going to do anything to that. But
too bad. Yeah.
Plot device. Apparently, he does fall, and it. Eventually, they figure that all out, and so now they have 2 crystals, and they're like, "Well, we don't know where the rest of them are, but the yellow one is under Valuan ownership. We should go check that out."
Valua is under the yellow moon, so that's where the yellow moon crystal is for the moment.
Right. So, after leaving Ixtaka, they head over to where the yellow gigas is supposed to be sealed, because the crystal is supposed to be around there somewhere, according to rumors. And they find the gate is sealed shut, like there's no way in, from the top at least. So they're like, well, we just got to figure out what else to do. And at that point, while they're trying to figure themselves out, Rachnam attacks or shows up. And so Drachma's like, I got to do this. I've been following you around for a while. Let me have this. And they're like, okay, yeah, we got you. We'll help you out. And then Ramirez, who is a problem, shows up, blows up the little jack, setting it on fire. So the party is forced to escape on lifeboats, but Drachma stays behind because he's not letting Rachnam get away.
He goes down with the ship.
That's right. He's going down with the ship.
That's right.
At this point, we're also learning that Ramirez has some connection to Fina's past as well, so that's fun. But then after that battle, Vice and Ica and Fina get separated, kind of like what we were referring to before. Vice kind of gets stuck on this island, and Ica and Fina get rescued by Claudia, who then drops them off in Nazrad. And, they go through a series of events. Vice eventually gets saved by Gilder. Ica and Fina purchase their own small boat. They discover a map through all of that, and they both realize it's to Ducat's Isle. They end up landing on Ducat's Isle on separate sides. They work through it, and they meet up again at the boss, essentially. And it's a great moment because you realize that the treasure is friendship all along the way, and there's not a coin to their name. Well,
and Ica is very displeased with this treasure.
Yeah, this one coin. But Gilder laughs it off. It's a good little moment.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, right, they end up heading back to Nazrad. Nazrad's under attack by the Valuan Armada. And guess who it is? It's Ramirez, the constant thorn in our side. And he ends up capturing the party. Gets sent to the Grand Fortress.
Pretty much single-handedly, he ends up capturing everyone.
Right, because he's so obnoxiously powerful. And it's a big moment narratively where you realize, like, hey, you don't want to mess with him. Mm-hmm. So, but thankfully, Vice and Gilder are able to break out. They rescue Ica from Vigoro. And on the way out, and Fina, I should say, they rescued Fina too. But on the way out, they get some help from Prince Enrique, who happens to be the Crown Prince of the Empire, who doesn't like Mummy's decisions. So he actually escapes with them, directs them to the Delphinus, and basically hands over the keys to this giant flagship to Vice and says, here, you're the captain now. Have fun. I'm coming with you. So that's when we get...
And they reobtain the moon crystals, which Ramirez had taken from them before when they were captured.
Yeah, that's true.
Enrique just swipes them and is like, here you go.
Right, because I remember him pulling them out of his alleged pockets, and I'm like, what pockets were holding those? So...
Hammer space pockets.
Captain Tight Pants over there.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so with the help of Prince Enrique, we escape the Grand Fortress, blowing a hole in it, so we have escaped Valua twice now. in a way that should never have happened, according to
Well, on our
their-
way to becoming legends.
Right. No longer Vice the Ninny. And they go back to Crescent Isle. They do a handful of things, determine that the next crystal is beyond what they call the Dark Rift in the lands of Yaphetoma. So, with the Delphinus on them, with its better engines and stronger armor, they travel through the Dark Rift and exit the other side to Yaphetoma, which is a feat of its own because Vice has to accomplish all the impossible tasks in this story.
Mm-hmm.
And then in Yaphetoma, they are met with more Valuan people. Didn't expect that to happen, but here we are. And there's also like political strife happening, and there's distrust of outsiders. But Vice, being the person that he is like, guys, I'll take care of it. Listen, I'll earn your trust. I'll go do this other thing. So they recover the blue crystal after defeating the blue Gigas.
With the Moonstone Cannon.
Right. Yeah, it's the first time you get to defeat a Gigas, and you're introduced to the Moonstone Cannon prior to this. But they defeat Blue Heim in the lands of Yaphetoma. And then they're like, well, we need to go find the purple crystal, which is in the frozen lands of Glacia. And there they discovered that Racnum, the legendary Arkwell that we've been dealing with all this time, is actually the purple Gigas. And they meet Drachma there, thinking that Drachma had died. They found him. Drachma's been caring for Racnum all this time until he finally dies. And then the purple crystal is retrieved upon its death. After that, we get to return to Valua again to retrieve the yellow crystal. But this time, we get the benefit of being able to fly underneath the lands. Something about the Yaphethoman heights and depths, they were able to go higher and lower than the mid-ocean
Yeah, the ship gets upgraded in Yaphetoma to be able to do this.
Right. Well, I think it's upgraded in Crescent Isle, but they're given the schematics for it essentially.
Yeah, you get the schematics, you can upgrade it.
Right.
Yep.
So they go below the Valuan continent, and we navigate like a maze, one of like 2 or 3 actual ship dungeons, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we fight the yellow Gigas to get the yellow crystal. What was the yellow Gigas' name? I don't remember.
Yeah, I was trying to remember that. I don't remember it either.
Gigas name. Yellogar, that's what it is.
Okay.
Yep. So Yellogar, you fight Yellogar, and they get the yellow crystal, and it's like, yes, we can prevent Valua from ever getting these crystals and calling upon the rains of destruction, because that's what they do. When they're all together, they summon the rains of destruction. However, returning back to Crescent Isle, Ramirez and Gaussian show up, attack the island. Ramirez steals the crystals from the party. And together, Ramirez and Gaussian will raise the lost Sylvite city known as Soltis, which is also a Gigas. It's like the silver, or the white moon, silver moon Gigas. And their whole goal is to unleash the rains of destruction upon the land so that they have ultimate power, right? So Ice and Ica and the party take on Gaussian. They land on
his base. It's a sky base. I don't remember the name of it.
Oh yeah.
The fortress of some kind.
Yeah, there's a fortress. They go digging into that, trying to figure out what's going on, right? Deal with the Loco again, who sinks into the deep sky finally after all that. But yeah, they finally find a way to get onto Soltis, right? The Great Silver Shrine. And there they confront Gaussian and defeat him, which makes Ramirez lose his mind. Ramirez somehow...
The Hydra. Sorry.
Yeah, the Hydra, yeah. Ramirez somehow merges with Zelos, the ultimate Gigas, after an intense...
The Silver.
Yeah. But after like a battle with him, essentially defeating Soltis and Zelos and all of that, Soltis sinks back into the deep sky, and the world is saved. Bicyca and Fina become legendary air pirates and sail off into the sunset in search of new adventures. So, and we're talking big, broad strokes of the story. If you want more details, go watch what we played.
Yep, that's the full plot, really, more or less. There are quite a few details in there, but seriously, if you have our full playthrough up, feel free to watch it or check it out for yourself. We did have a couple of thoughts, just mechanically, on the game. I will go ahead and take over here. So, gameplay-wise, in this game, obviously we've covered kind of the localization, development, and the plot here, but there is basically the battle system in this game is pretty outstanding. It uses something called the spirit gauge, which continually charges during the fight based on your character's stats and allows for special moves. So that is pretty unique and a good aspect of the battle system. Almost everything else outside of your standard attack, guard, and item usage requires the consumption of the spirit gauge. That includes magic as well. So if you want to use magic or special moves, you are using this gauge, more or less. And basically it allows you to strategize and consider, what is the cost of the actions you're going to take? How do you want to save up for a future action? Do you want to defend for a while and then unleash a really big move? Do you want to, continually have certain defensive moves up, which can become very, very important for bigger boss fights. If you have played this game, you understand hearing Delta Shield repeatedly every boss fight.
Yeah. Shield of Justice, too.
And Shield of Justice is a good anti-attrition, Justice Shield, anti-attrition mechanic. And there are a lot of defensive moves like this, as well as kind of building up for your big hitters as well. So it's a relatively unique approach, especially for the time, and certainly a very good one. It's definitely something that works for this game. On the subject of what works, airship battles are another aspect of the battle system, and they function entirely differently, almost, than your on-the-ground battles. And to this day, I have never seen ship battles like this in this genre of game.
Yeah.
They are unique. They require strategy and thinking ahead. You have to plan ahead. You have to... sometimes you are aiming to fire guns from your ship on your next full turn. Every turn being 3 to 4 moves long, basically, because your crew is manning your ship, your crew being your party. That said, it is a very accessible system as well. It's not too complex. Generally, you're able to figure out what's going on, and it certainly never feels like it's way too much, but it also gives a unique challenge, which I find very satisfying. Yeah, no other game really does ship battles like this that we have seen, although there are games that have been inspired by Skies of Arcadia nowadays, and of course there are other games that do ship battles, airship battles, but within this genre, very, very unique.
Right. In fact, one of the games that's being worked on currently that I kind of watch, this is a side note, is called Horizons of Arcadia. Achaia? Not Arcadia. Horizons of Achaia. It's not even like at an early stage of testing at the moment, but we discovered it not long after we finished our playthrough of Skies of Arcadia. And there's clearly a lot of like spiritual successor choices that they're making. Like they are so inspired by Skies of Arcadia, they wanted to create this game. And it's the closest thing I've seen so far, because they were showing a little bit of how they want to do their ship battles. The closest thing I've seen of taking what Skies of Arcadia did and possibly creating a more robust system out of it. So I'll be interested to see what they do with it.
Yeah, that and that does, and I believe we'll touch on this more a little bit later, but that certainly does speak to just how good and robust of a system the ship battles are. It's a very unique mechanical approach. There are unique fun and strategy elements in there when it could have just been very boring turn-based fights, but you're in ships.
Right.
They took the time to make it a different system, to make it feel like you're really flying around in a ship and you are outwitting an opponent in a tactical fashion, which is very satisfying. Also, you can usually, once you get a certain ways into the game, fire a gigantic laser cannon at a lot of your enemies, which is always satisfying.
Right. Who doesn't want to shoot a giant laser beam?
That's right. Exactly. Moving on a little from the battle system, very generally speaking, this game works because it has such a strong sense of adventure. And it really is, as you explore this world, you get this sense of you are looking into every little corner of this world. You're understanding the history. Sometimes you don't understand it fully, but that's just sort of how history works. And you can really see that there were people who studied history in our world that worked on this, because sometimes you get a primary source and it really doesn't tell you a lot.
Right.
But from the themes of the narrative to the discoveries, the side quests, you feel like you are the one exploring the skies of this world and discovering the mysteries, figuring out what exactly happened, figuring out enigmatic forces such as the Great Silver Shrine we mentioned earlier in the plot review, or, what are these larger empires and smaller kingdoms doing in this world. It is such a rich and robust world that I think overall it is well worth your time.
Right. Not even to mention like the history that is explored a little bit through the discoveries and through the dialogue of the narrative, right? Because all these countries and lands that you explore have come off of a cataclysmic destructive force from like centuries ago, with the potential of another one upcoming, except for the protagonists kind of get in the way of that, right? But there's also like things that aren't known even by their world's accounting. Like the Black Moonstone is a complete mystery, even to the people who are in the game. Yeah, we'll definitely get more into the Black Moonstone here momentarily. But yeah, there are some things that you don't know enough about them, and you also don't know why you don't know enough. It's just a distant history, but there is also, this world is, in a very real sense, a post-apocalyptic world, but you'd never know it from the tone. Right. Very, very interesting. So, it provokes wanting to explore everything, see it for yourself. You really feel like you are becoming Vice, the legend, when you play this game. Yes. What doesn't work in this game, in our opinion, is the magic system. It is a rather unique system, and there are times where it works very well, such as in ship combat. It generally will help you out, but it often falls flat in most encounters. Generally, all you need are buffs such as Incrum and Quika, and those are not necessary to actually cast the spells of, because you can buy items, Glyph of Might, Glyph of Speed, that do those for you. Incremus is nice, but often you are using Delta Shield, which blocks all magic, including buffs. Right. And so just to actually get things working for a lot of boss fights, the magic system ends up excluded. Which is very unfortunate, because the seal, when you are casting magic, is very cool. The vocal lines are excellent. There are a lot of really cool spells. The naming, the nomenclature of the spells is really cool. It's clearly a well-developed system. It just doesn't mechanically work, which is very unfortunate. But except for Horizon. Oh yeah, of course. That spell can go jump off a cliff. I'm fine with that. So Ryzen, yes. 50% chance to revive your party member, which really means 5% chance about. Exactly. Yeah. Kind of playing off of this magic system, I think another thing that doesn't really work, unfortunately, and I think it's because there are two aspects of the same issue, is that with all of like your major boss encounters, especially the hardest ones, you almost exclusively have to use Delta Shield and Shield of Justice. And like I know you can get away with not doing those things, but for like the least aggravating approach to a lot of these fights, you're almost forced into this rotation of Delta Shield, Shield of Justice, regular attacks. And because of that, the spells aspect of it isn't as useful, because the people you need to do the spells are the ones that are getting caught up in those aspects, and so you just get into this rotation. And I think it would have been nice to see a couple of varieties of strategies, right? Like, you know, with Gaussian, we were forced to fight with Gilder, and so we were forced to use a different type of strategy because Gilder had certain skills that like negated some of Gaussian's big problems. But it didn't stop the other party members from getting the benefits of other spells and stuff like that. So I feel like if we had a little bit more variant where Delta Shield wasn't required for every single major encounter, could be more utilized in other ways. Same thing goes for Enrique. Both of them have really unique, cool abilities, cool like skills, specials, all of that. And you get to see them a third of the time, maybe half the time, because the other half you're spending just keeping the party alive, right?
Gaussian is an interesting example because essentially all you're really doing is using his aura of denial for the strategy you're talking about, which blocks special effects, as opposed to because we don't have Justice Shield available because Enrique is unavailable the encounter. So Delta Shield, I don't believe is necessary for that fight because Aura of Denial blocks all of the effects that normally Delta Shield would block. So we do get to more freely utilize Ica, but it is very, very similar to your standard strategy. And just to kind of elaborate on the mechanical problem a little bit, because I can already hear the objections here. So you can, if you want to, play through this game. It's not hard enough for you to just kind of play through and be like, I'm just going to be a magic. I'm going to be a mage. I'm going to be a magic playthrough, all of this. You know, you could just cast magic all the time. You can ignore special moves. It's going to be hard, but you can do it. And that is viable, but the problem with kind of merging them is, one, Delta Shield is incompatible with most magic that is support-based. And it is such a potent move in that it blocks all magic from hitting your party. It's incredibly overtuned for what it does. Right. It is very good, but it's almost required to use it because it also has such a low cost that your turn economy is so much better when using it. As opposed to needing to heal all the time, heal status effects, revive characters if they get hit with silver instant kill spells such as Eternum. You just Delta Shield all of it, and then you ignore that aspect of the battle system. As long as you have Ica alive and she can Delta Shield the party, magic can be completely ignored, and you just kind of smack them with your special moves.
Right. And you end up using like Saccharine crystals instead of the actual spell.
Yeah. There are Rizalim crystals for reviving. There are Sacrum and Saccharilin crystals for healing. There you can accomplish all of the support you need with items that you normally would use magic for, which leaves magic to being debuffs as well as offensive moves. And to be frank, special moves are much better offensive moves most of the time than magic is. Yeah. So you can technically do a merge a little bit, but the turn economy just doesn't lend itself to that very well. And that's really the problem, is you are going to kind of naturally be it's the player conditioning is such that you're just going to end up spamming Cutlass Fury and Delta Shield through a lot of the game because it's so incredibly effective.
Right. Well, and also because you can change the color of your weapon, that kind of takes place of, say, casting electric on an enemy, because the offensive spells feel really weak. Like even the strongest Hyrule spell, which is the fire-based spell, feels incredibly weak compared to a buffed Cutlass Wrath. Cutlass Fury, excuse me.
Cutlass Wrath!
I knew it was going to hit me at some point. A buffed,
it had to happen.
It did. A buffed Cutlass Fury with the right, like, opposing element on the blade is severely stronger than the strongest spell for that, like, type, right? And so it's just, why?
In addition, Fina is the dedicated caster, and it's still much more beneficial to rely on her special moves because she can do such good support with her special moves.
Yeah.
You combine items with her ability to support with Aika's ability to just be the party's shield, and then, Enrique as a fourth is extremely good with his Justice Shield. If you run Gilder, you can Aura of Denial. If you run Drachma, you can use Spirit Charge to charge up the Spirit gauge to a crazy degree.
Right.
And then you could just throw ultimate moves with your fourth and with Vice. And it just ends up being a kind of the way to approach the combat. Now, is that a big problem that it's imbalanced? Well, yes and no. It does mean you don't have a huge amount of build variety without paying in, a lot of inconvenience and a lot of, it's possible battles will get away from you a lot more often unless you use this extremely safe, extremely powerful strategy. But it is very satisfying to just Pirate's Wrath someone into oblivion or build up and throw Prophecy and just annihilate the enemy party. But yeah, and to my knowledge, there weren't a lot of full party moves in turn-based RPGs around the time Skies of Arcadia first came out. And Prophecy is very satisfying. It's the whole spirit gauge, it's the whole party, but it does enormous damage to all enemies on the screen.
Right.
And then there is the party Blue Rogues, which you get to see the rest of your crew when you use as well.
Which all do different things too. So depending on your crew, you could have like full heals, certain types of buffs, and all that other stuff. So it's a worthwhile one to use, but Prophecy tends to win out as far as like which one you're using at a full gauge.
Yep, exactly, because the damage is just so good.
Right.
Yep. Yeah.
But that being said, we do still love this game. Like I've said it before, I'll say it again. It's one of my all-time favorite turn-based RPGs. Granted, it was one of my first, so there's probably some nostalgia glasses going on there, but it's a great game, and there's a reason why so many people love it, and why there's always that question of like, well, will they ever make a remake of it? Probably not, but one can hope.
Maybe a remaster, one would hope.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. But yeah, I think overall, even with some of the mechanical issues this game has, some of it is, a result of its time, but I think it's extremely worthwhile to play, even for just the mechanical aspect alone. And then if you throw in the incredibly compelling and enjoyable story, the characters, the just tone and feeling of playing the game, makes it an extremely worthwhile entry. So give it a shot.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, we do want to kind of cover there is some very interesting theory crafting in this game as well.
Right.
That kind of comes from the existing lore. And these are things that are not necessarily stated directly by the game, and they may not even be true, but it's a very fun thing to do. And we definitely want to cover this for you just so you can see kind of some of the interesting texture of this world, the questions it provokes.
Right, yeah, because we covered a lot of like lore, especially around the Black Moonstone and some of the other stuff. We pointed to the in-game like descriptions of stuff and kind of went through some of this. This is kind of outside of that, even more so, but we wanted to point some fan theories your direction because you may find them just as interesting as we did. So,
Yep, and first up on that is Ramirez's true origins and a possible Sylvite experiment. So there is some speculation among the fan base that Admiral Ramirez was not a typical Sylvite, but he was rather a genetic experiment or an artificial being, an enhanced being of sorts. Unlike other Sylvites, he lacks their characteristic white hair and instead has silver hair and golden eyes, possibly indicating an altered lineage. This theory suggests that he was created or modified to wield immense power and loyalty to Galcian, explaining his near superhuman abilities.
Yeah. I think some of this falls flat because of Fina also having the same kind of character traits that Ramirez does. Her hair is also not white in the same way. But it's a fun thought.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it is a fun thought. And one of the problems is we see two Sylvites that are human-like, one should say.
Right.
I think I'll choose to call it that. But yeah, Ramirez and Fina is the sample size, so it could be something as simple as they don't all have the same hair and eye color, guys.
Right. Just the elders happen to, and we don't even know if that's their true hair color because they're like half people. There's some kind of strange cyborg, and the elders are very interesting because they're essentially this weird fantasy sci-fi tech mix, and that's really what the Silver Civilization. It's probably the most advanced civilization on Arcadia. But we meet the elders, and they're pretty much cyborgs. Yeah.
Very interesting. But yeah, and with regards to just silver hair, golden eyes, I think Fina's is silver and green.
Yeah, that's true.
But yeah, with regards to his power, I mean, he is clearly very strong, but he has also been, training and everything. And there is also the idea of that, well, he's the big antagonist,
right.
And you keep fighting, he keeps beating you up, kind of the, there are some interesting mechanical reasons that may be just some ludonarrative dissonance there, but it sure is a fun thought that he might be just a strange, genetically enhanced being of sorts.
Well, and they also sent him down specifically to recover the crystals, and then something happened, and then he became under Galcian's thumb. So, willingly served under Galcian, I should add. But this kind of leads into the second theory, which is that the true nature of the Rains of Destruction, like supposedly, according to the elders, they created this to maintain a balance for some reason. But there's actually a theory out there that the Rains of Destruction were actually the result of a failed Sylvite experiment gone wrong. The theory kind of suggests that Sylvites may have originally intended to create an energy source or maybe a defense mechanism, which I think is more likely than an energy source, considering all the Gigas that were showing up at this time, but instead unleashed a catastrophic weapon that ended up devastating all the civilizations.
Yeah.
I'm not as likely to believe this particular theory because the elders kind of explicitly state, oh yeah, we did this, and there's implication that they were the ones alive during the first one. So I'm more inclined to think that they genuinely did it to quote unquote create balance by wiping out civilization and letting it grow up again because they decided to play God.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, that seems unlikely that it was a failed experiment. It's certainly possible, that they, oops, we made a mistake and blew up everything. Hey, this was a good idea for these reasons. All right, let's maintain that we did that we totally did it on purpose, guys. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, there's not enough primary source material for that, I think. It's an interesting thought, though.
That's why it's theory crafting.
Exactly. There's also a theory that Saltus, after the final battle, there's a theory regarding the fate of Saltus and the Great Silver Shrine. Basically, that Saltus sinks back into deep sky, and some believe it still exists and it's waiting to rise again. This theory is supported by the idea that Saltus was designed to be mobile, meaning it could one day return to the surface of another powerful force or to awaken it.
Yeah, I'm inclined to believe that's probably true. I just don't think it will happen quickly, if at all. Right, like I think it can.
So the problem I have with that one is, don't we see Saltus kind of breaking up near the end of the game?
A little bit, yeah, but when it first rises from the deep sky, doesn't it come up in pieces?
I don't recall. Okay. You might be right about that.
Let us know in the comments. I don't remember. Maybe there'll be some clips riding behind us at this point. I don't know.
That could be true. Yeah. Yeah. Look at the annotations. Don't worry about it. But yeah. Yeah,
Pay no
that's an
attention to the man
interesting
behind
one.
the map, the curtain.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I do find that to be an interesting one, especially with the resilience and interesting advanced nature of silver technology. It's essentially Magitech,
right?
In a lot of ways. So it could be that that's just, oh well, okay, it's gonna break apart and then go back down here and then it'll come back up. Deep Sky is a very mysterious place anyway,
right?
So it does make sense that it's possible.
I mean, when you're going down the vortex in Deep Sky, you're seeing what looks to be like a skyline that's just been sunk for so long. So there's no telling what's all down there, right?
Yeah, we see a very, very small section of deep sky in the game.
Right. From here, we're going to take a turn a little bit. We talked about how all these discoveries and Vice is flying around, discovering all these things. And, one of his big dreams is to sail beyond the sun, right? So Vice and his crew explore most of the known world, but there is a theory that Arcadia, as we've experienced it, is really only kind of like one part of a much larger planet. And I really like the idea of that to some degree, because maybe there are continents that are associated with the Black Moon or some other stuff that we're not familiar with, right? The discovery that the world is round hints at the possibility of more continents or civilizations beyond what's in the game. But the whole map is round, so I feel like we would have seen those things. So there's some credence to it, and there's also some I don't know, I don't think so. But it would have been a great way to set up for a sequel if they had ever made one.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea, and there is not a lot known about Arcadia. Is one of the reasons I think this could work, even though we sail around the world kind of thing. But who's to say that Arcadia is shaped like a typical planet? Could it be like a weird destroyed half planet, and then there's another planet being held nearby by its gravity, if gravity applies the way we think it does? Could it be that, we sailed around a large portion of the round-ish portion of this broken apart planet or something like that? I mean, there's all sorts of ways to do that, but just based on the understanding of the characters in the game, probably not.
Right. I'm sure there's still room for there's this whole land we never discovered before, because it's a big world regardless.
Or we can finally go into Deep Sky and hey, there are people living down here, kind of thing.
Right. Or go to space.
Yep. Yeah. There is did you have any more about that one?
No, go ahead.
Okay, yeah. There's another theory as well we wanted to cover. There's Gaussian's ultimate plan and the possible manipulation of Ramirez. So the idea of this one is Gaussian was a master strategist, and some believe that he always planned for Ramirez to take his place if things went wrong. This theory suggests that Gaussian manipulated Ramirez from the beginning, turning him into a weapon of vengeance to ensure that Valua, or at least his ideology, would live on even if he died. And I don't have any problem. This one almost seems like it's just the subtext of what Gaussian is doing.
Right, yeah, I think so.
This seems like a pretty solid one to me.
Yeah, Gaussian, clearly doesn't care about other people. He wants to be the ruler. But I do think he was a smart enough guy and saw something in Ramirez that he could break and mold to himself. That this kind of theory makes perfect sense. So he
wanted a successor.
Yeah, sure. But speaking of Gaussian, this is something one of our commenters pointed out during our playthrough and that we just never covered, and I think it's a good time to talk about this. There is a theory that Elcian is in fact a reincarnation of Gaussian, right? Because Elcian is just such a unique enemy. And there's several points to that, right? So there's the name similarity, Elcian versus Gaussian, right? The most obvious hint in the name itself is that Elcian is the anagram of Gaussian with one letter changed. And given that Elcian is a secret post-game boss with no lore explanation, this could be an intentional Easter egg left by the developers to imply a connection. We don't really know. There's thoughts about Elcien as Gaussian's vengeful spirit, right? Some fans theorize that Elcien is the spiritual essence of Gaussian, reborn in some form after his death. Gaussian's ultimate goal was total domination of Arcadia, and he believed strength was the only path to survival. If his hatred and willpower were strong enough, perhaps his soul manifested as a powerful being, returning for one final battle to test Vice. There's also the concept of the location, right? You find Elcien in Deep Sky near Soltis. So it's the same place where Soltis was lost and where Gaussian enacted his final plan. So Gaussian fell during the climactic battle above Soltis. It's possible that his essence, whether physical or spiritual, remained in Deep Sky, eventually becoming Elcien. And this could imply that Elcien is either a reborn Gaussian or a byproduct of the immense power used in that final battle.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think so. There's lots of really interesting things that, other things would be like Elcien might have been Gaussian's like what if scenario. So like another theory suggests that Elcien represents what Gaussian could have become if he had obtained all the moon crystals and ascended to that godlike state. Gaussian sought to reshape the world with power, and Elcien's overwhelming strength could be a glimpse into that ultimate form he might have reached had he fully controlled the Gigas and moon crystals. And then there's also the idea that Elcien as a test from Gaussian's will, right? So if Elcien isn't literally Gaussian reincarnated, it could be a manifestation of his ideology. So, a test for Vice to see if he is truly worthy of leading the new era throughout Skies of Arcadia. Gaussian represents ruthless strength and conquest, while Vice tends to embody freedom and adventure. Elcien may be that final confrontation between those two opposing ideas, existing solely to challenge Vice one last time.
Yeah, that's an interesting theory. I quite like that one, especially given the name similarity and when it appears. I mean, it's coincidental, or maybe it isn't, Right. I could see that being intended, but it's just never directly stated.
Yeah, of course. And there are some counterpoints, right, to why Elcien might not be Gaussian, right? There's a lack of story context. Unlike Gaussian, Elcien has zero dialogue, no clear motivations. If it were truly meant to be Gaussian's reincarnation, you might expect some hint within the game's story. Elcien has a different fighting style. Gaussian was a master swordsman, while Elcien is more of a otherworldly force, which could imply something is completely separate entity rather than a direct reincarnation. Or maybe it's just maybe the developers were just like, let's just have a secret challenge boss, right? Elcien could exist purely for gameplay reasons, serving no ludonarrative purpose whatsoever.
I could see it.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible. Games do it all the time. But I think that there's a lot of credence to the Elcien as Gaussian concept, even if it's just his ideology, a representation, a personification of that, right? Of what he represented versus what Vice represents. Because Elcien is meant to be a very difficult boss to contend with. So it's meant to be a challenge.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. I like that one a lot. I like to think that is, that's one I would headcanon very much. And speaking of headcanon, I do want to make sure we cover kind of probably the biggest fan theory within Skies of Arcadia, and that is the lost seventh black moon. So we did cover this in our gameplay, but real quickly, just to take you through it, there are a lot of hints in and around the Dark Rift, for the most part, that hint at a seventh moon existing, the Black Moon. And the Black Moon would be the power of gravity, and it's able to reverse the local gravitational pull, and it may have imploded into a black hole-like phenomenon under its own power, and it's possible that it actually created the Dark Rift out of the Black Continent. Some of the evidence for this are the Black Moonstone, which is a discovery, and it's probably the biggest evidence that there is some kind of lost Black Moon. Perhaps it's gone, perhaps it crashed into the planet, and perhaps something else happened to it.
Right. And we do see evidence in a few of the discoveries, right? There are, instead of 6, there are 7
Yes.
bodies.
So mysterious rings. You can take the mysterious rings discovery as a chart of the planet Arcadia and its moons, of which there are 7, and 1 is pointing in another direction, and 1 is non-influenced like the other 5 by the Rains of Destructions. Which could imply that instead of the Black Moon being destroyed or imploding, it lost gravitational pull to Arcadia and flew off into oblivion. We do hear from Old World Yafatoma at one point as well, who was a participant in the first Gigas Wars, meaning the Dark Rift did not always exist to cut off navigation between the continents, which is interesting. The Sylvite Elders never mention a Black Moon, but are very guarded with information, so they may not have divulged it, especially given that it may have caused the downfall of civilization. It could have been associated with the Rains of Destruction. And there are a couple of others, like the Inverse Isles. There is also the idea that the Black Moon is Arcadia itself, that we live on the Black Moon. So this is an interesting theory. Clearly, there was a Black Moon at some point. What happened to it is up to debate. We don't have access to Black Moon magic. There is no Black Moon in the sky, so clearly something happened.
Right. And the only real evidence we have of the Black Moon is in the Dark Rift. You don't see shards of Black Moon anywhere else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It could be that Arcadia turned into something of a black hole due to the crash. It would be a very different phenomenon than what a black hole is in our universe. It would be more of a magical gravitational thing. But yeah, it's possible that that's part of it. But taking the mysterious rings, I believe the most likely explanation is either the Black Moon was destroyed during the rains, or it just flew off somewhere else. Like, it just flew off into the universe for, like, perhaps its own power. It reversed its gravity, and it's just like, bye-bye, and it just goes off to, like, wreak havoc somewhere else or something like that.
I'm taking my ball and going home.
Yeah. So now we're left with just this Black Moon stone that's evidence that there ever was one, along with, like, an old chart.
Right, yeah. I'm more inclined to think that the Black Moon was destroyed or failed in some way. Like, I am more inclined to think that it crashed into the planet versus flying off into space, just given the destructive history of Arcadia.
Yep.
Because like I'm immediately remembering in Nazar, there's one of the discoveries, I don't remember which exactly, but there's talks about trade routes and how they used to be able to walk from one city to the next. But when we're exploring the Nazar area, there's no way that that's possible. Like,
right.
Nazrad and the other cities are not connected by landmass. There's space in between them. So Rains of Destruction had a huge impact. And the Black Moon being destroyed or falling into the planet or whatever happened even before that. So that means there's entire, like, continent space that's just non-existent. And so it's very possible, I think you already said this, but to your point, the Black Moon may have even created the Dark Rift or the Deep Sky. Maybe those are two connected pieces.
Yeah, it could be both. And, you know, I was mentioning earlier that maybe Arcadia is split into two or more different pieces. Maybe it's not a planet as we know it. Maybe we've explored a large shard of it, and it's possible that the Black Moon crashing into it has split it in half, and there's another planet. We'd have to, like, travel to it through some kind of passage or something like that. That's the reason I say that, is if there was some sort of calamity where an entire moon slammed into this planet and gravity functions in a very weird magical way, it's possible. Maybe it's part of this, like, mass that is Arcadia. We don't really know what's at the center. The world appears to be round, but we could be flying in skies above, like, just nothing but ridiculous amounts of debris, and maybe the Black Moon is standing in the center of all of it.
Right. Yeah, we just don't know. And in fact, there was some speculation for a while there, it may still be there, that the Black Moon may have been a cut plot element that could have been explored in, like, a future game. Again, if they had ever done a sequel, that would have been a great opportunity to show, like, lost history, new civilizations, even new forms of moon crystals or gigas to contend with. Like, because there's just so much we don't know about the Black Moon and how it interacted with everything else.
Yep. That's true.
So, but yeah, that's just a handful of like some lore theory crafting. Hopefully you find that stuff interesting. I know I do, and I love hearing Dan's lore expertise because he's our lore expert. And always filled with lots of knowledge.
Let us know what you think. I mean, there are a lot of things you could say about the Black Moon. There's the Black Moon as the dark counterpart to the Silver Moon, sort of the Dark Moon, as Ramirez would say. There is Black Moon's possible connection to Elcian. There's the idea that maybe it's a seal for an ancient power of some kind. But that would definitely align with the cut content idea. You know, it's possible they were going to do something with the Black Moon and not anymore.
Psych.
Yeah, or canceled sequel, yeah. Right. But yeah, if you have any headcanon about any of this, you know, we definitely want to hear from you.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, if there was ever a time to give us your thoughts, this is the one to do it in. Like, do it all the time, but definitely this one.
Yep.
So that's our kind of some lore, some theory points, and we just kind of want to wrap this up with some like of our overall impression of the world, right? So like, there's clearly a reason this game is so loved after so many years. I mean, we're looking at 20 to 20, 25, 26 years at this point since this game was released. And, you know, even at the time of release, Metacritic gave Skies of Arcadia like a 93 out of 100, and the GameCube port came in at like 84. So it's clear the team really put their heart into this game because you can see it in the details of the environments, the design of the characters, the music, the story they tried to tell. Like, everything is great. And, you know, I've said it before and I'll repeat it again, that I love this game. You know, I discovered it probably in the 2003, 2004 range in a GameStop. It was on sale. It was a used game. And, you know, I had a GameCube at the time with a fairly sparse collection of games to play on it. I think I had like 2 or 3, maybe. And for many people, Final Fantasy was their first encounter with the JRPG style of game. For me, it was Skies of Arcadia. And from the moment I booted it up, I was hooked, and I have found myself revisiting it periodically ever since. I think this game does a wonderful job creating a lively cast of characters who are comical and compelling. There's plenty of moments of levity, but there's also this strong, flowing narrative that has a good pace, right? It's being told over the course of events. And while I won't say the story is like this groundbreaking with its unpredictable nature and its plot twist, I will say that developers really leaned into creating an adventure that you can feel satisfied with, especially for a game during this era. Skies of Arcadia Legends did something that wasn't normally done, right? It was a large world that is full of hidden discoveries, which add to the depth and the lore of the world of Arcadia, not to mention the different cultures, the architecture, and the corresponding ruins that are present underneath each of the moons, and all of that kind of makes the world feel just so much more alive and complex and big. And even around all that, you know, the composition quality of the music is definitely worth studying, as it complements the scenes it is in very well. Like, there's always a sense of adventure when flying around in the airships, and each area has its own unique flavor and enhances the entire experience as a whole. And if you appreciate good, atmospheric, scenic music, definitely take the time to listen and take to what they did here, right? It's worth the study. So I'll always have this game as one of my top 3 recommendations for people wanting to get into older JRPGs. Like, if someone were to say, man, I really want to get into some JRPGs, but I want to play some of the older ones, what are your suggestions? My top 3 is always going to be Skies of Arcadia. Even when there are big moments happening in this game, you don't feel pressured to push forward. There's always time to go explore, go do something else, right? Exploration is king, and you are rewarded for it.
That's right. And just some of my thoughts, just in closing here. To me, Skies of Arcadia stands as a particularly unique game from a time many consider to be the golden age of turn-based RPGs. While it retains many story elements of its era, it manages to be colorful and lively with a fascinating world and a plot focused on adventure and discovery, despite the looming threats involved. There is always something new to find, and from the first few hours of the game, you are flying through the sky looking for the secrets of this storied ancient world. The main story is relatively straightforward, and the beats are all character-focused. You are encouraged to investigate and come to your own conclusions about the world at large, with lore discoveries adding to the color and depth of the world. While it can be annoying to cast about and try to find these at times, the rewards are well worth the effort, both with regards to in-game mechanical rewards and the content itself.
Looking at you, Paper Airplane.
That's right. Though the battle system is not exactly revolutionary in the modern era, at the time, Skies of Arcadia was a contemporary of the PS1 Final Fantasies, and I believe stands as a solid alternative to the ATB system that Final Fantasy VII and VIII continue to use from the previous titles, while managing to stay very simple compared to mastering a title like Legend of Dragoon's complex additions in order to optimize your damage output. Though the magic system in Arcadia is interesting, it manages to become secondary to special moves and item usage, which is unfortunate considering how cool it is to hear "Moons, give me strength" with the hum of magic from the lunar seals at the feet of our characters. This combined with a few character balance issues keeps me from wholeheartedly endorsing the main battle system, but it is both satisfying and contains enough depth to lead to some challenging encounters and genuinely cool moments built by the mechanics, and the simplicity prevents any flaws from breaking the experience. So I do stand by it as a good system. The airship battle system is the most unique mechanic to Arcadia, and the level of strategy it demands to perform it well is impressive, while the interface manages to remain not only readable, but actively helpful, so you can really leverage the system. Upgrading the very limited quantity of ships you get is very satisfying, but if this game came out today, I suspect there would be a much larger quantity of ships and a whole system dedicated to these fights in particular. This being a desirable outcome of this system speaks to how well thought out and excellent it is, and should tell you all you need to know about this aspect of the game. The voice acting is also excellent, if limited by its time, and came at a time before this was widespread in games. The characters speaking adds to the charm and depth of investment you have in their journey, and overall, I feel the story never leaves the player behind with regards to pacing, while managing to retain an open quality that encourages exploration and whimsy. You really feel invested in the party's journey by the end of this title, and the heroes are here to win the day with the power of friendship, which is always a heartwarming and satisfying way to tell a story, and stands in stark contrast to the darker themes of Final Fantasy at the time, offering a wholesome and thoroughly enjoyable, feel-good alternative. The question is never if the heroes of Arcadia will prevail, but how.
Right. So, yeah, that's our thoughts, but we want to know what your thoughts are, right? We've been talking about this game for like almost an hour and a half now. My throat's getting parched, so it's your turn. But yeah, let us know your thoughts. If there's other questions you want to add to it, feel free to respond to those. We do hope you've enjoyed your time here with us and that it was informative and that you were able to, listen and have fun. Maybe you were working and just listening away. Glad to provide that service to you, give you something for your ears to do, keep you busy, whatever. That being said, thank you so much for joining us today. We are so glad to have you here with us. I cannot encourage you to leave your own thoughts and comments below enough. And if you do like these retrospectives, let us know so that we know if we should do more of them, right? Because we want to do retrospectives. There has been some expressed interest, but if there's only like 3 of you, maybe that's something we can save for like a Patreon or something instead of the main channel. So just give us some feedback, please. But more than anything else, we just want to thank you for letting us be a part of your day, right? Because we know that there are a ton of video essays out there. We know there's a ton of game channels you could be watching, but you chose us, and that means a lot to us. So thank you so much from the bottom of our hearts. And we do hope that you have the most awesome of days. And we will catch you all in the next video.
See you next time.
Bye-bye now. Diddly diddly do 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 do. Thanks for watching.